You're listening to The Hikam with Shaykh Zahir Bacchus of the Low Tree Foundation. In this podcast, Shaykh Zahir explains the aphorisms from Ibn Ata'illah's famous book of wisdoms, Al-Hikam Al-Ata'iyah, a classical manual of spiritual development. Visit seekershub.org for online courses, our reliable answer service, and engaging media.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Allahumma alimna ma yanfa'na wa anfa'na bima alimtana wa zidna ilman bifadlika wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Ameen. So we've reached in the Hikam of Shaykh Ibn Ata'illah. We've reached number 100, in which he'll talk about, as he talked in the previous few or couple of the Hikam, the last few Hikmas that he covered. He talks about the concept, or he talks about neediness, about the servant being needy or expressing his need, or the servant realizing his need to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what he does from it, or what he gains from that expression of his need, or that realization that he is needy, that there's a need, and that he is just a needy servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he says, خَيْرَ أَوْقَاتِكَ وَقْتٌ تَشْهَدُ فِيهِ وُجُودَ فَاقَتِكَ وَتُرُدُّ فِيهِ إِلَى وُجُودِ ذِلَّتِكَ. So he says that خَيْرَ أَوْقَاتِكَ, that your best moment, or your best time, your best moment, is what? Is that in which you see your neediness. Your best moment is that in which you see your neediness. That's your best moment. And he says, وَتُرُدُّ فِيهِ إِلَى وُجُودِ ذِلَّتِكَ, and in which you are return to your lowliness. You return to humility, or you return to your lowliness. So he says that your best moment. Why is it that he says that your best moment is that in which you see your neediness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because within it is the when you see yourself as being low, or you see yourself as being a servant in need. This is what it means when you see yourself in that you are in need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that becomes one of the doors of realization of slavehood. It becomes one of the doors to the realization of slavehood. That realization of slavehood, and why is it a realization and not just knowing that one can know something? One can know something. Every day we pick up information. People tell us things that are probably, some things are necessary for us to know, and other things are not necessary for us to know. But they are things that we pick up, or things that we come to know of, whether by ourselves reading it, or listening to it, or examining it, or looking at it, or things that we don't set out to know. Our ears fall into the area in which we hear it. It falls into earshot, and we hear it. So every day there comes things that we come to know, things that we may not know from before, and then we come to know it. It doesn't necessarily mean that from knowing it that you have realization of it. It doesn't. Someone may know that they're a believer. Someone may know and testify that they are a believer. If they don't do something about it, if they don't perform acts of worship about it, then it's just to the level of knowledge. Just to the level of knowledge. But when do you realize that you are a believer? When do you realize or taste the sweetness of Iman? When is it that one tastes the sweetness of Iman? Is after worship. Worship, you have to do something about it. And so, the servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when is it that they really taste servitude? Or when do they become realized in their servitude? They become realized in their servitude when they're at a point, most cases, when they're at a point in which they see that they are in complete need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When they see that they're in complete need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if they are living in prosperity. Even when they're living in prosperity. Because they know that even in prosperity, dunyawi prosperity, that even in that without the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and without the bounty or favor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they would not have reached to that state of prosperity. Without the help of Allah, and without His guidance, and without His success, His tawfiq, that they would not have reached it. And they know that they're in the need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to continue them in that state. What do they know? They have knowledge, and they have become they know in their hearts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave it to them, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can certainly take it away from them. And so they continue in that thankfulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's when you become realized in that need that you have, and you become a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You become a servant. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this month of Rajab, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took the Prophet ﷺ, and that we are aware, that we all know, He took His servant on from Mecca to Jerusalem, to Bayt al-Maqdis, to Masjid al-Quds, in the month of Rajab. We know Isra Miraj happened. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us of it in the Quran, Surah Al-Isra, in the first verse, when He says, Subhanalladhi asra bi abdihi laylan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, and glory be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how remarkable it is, or glory be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, something that you can never imagine. Alladhi asra bi abdihi, who took His servant by night. Who took His servant by night. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who called the Prophet ﷺ His servant. He called him an abd, because that was the reality, that's the realization of the Prophet ﷺ. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam an abd, asra bi abdihi, that he took His servant. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called His servant an abd, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam an abd, He's not lowering him, He's raising him. He's raising him. He's raising him in degrees. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ was realized in his servitude, in his slavehood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He knew, and he had realization in what? In that everything that came to him came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And everything that was going to be taken or was taken would be from Allah. Allah subhanahu would have taken it. And Allah subhanahu would have decreed it. And every single success that came, that it came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And every difficulty that was removed because Allah removed it. Because Allah subhanahu removed it. And every difficulties that occurred to him was because there is a hikmah in it, or because of ease that would come after it. That there will be ease that come after, or within it. Or there's something to gain within that difficulty. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expresses it to us when He says, فَإِنَّمَا الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا, إِنَّمَا الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا, that verily with every difficulty, there is ease. With difficulty, there is ease. With difficulties, what is the ease? Some of the ulama, they look at the verse and they say, what is the difficulty? Ma'al usri yusra. That combining difficulties, there is an ease. What is the ease in difficulty? What is the ease that comes with difficulty? The ease that comes is what? Servitude. The ease that comes is realizing your faqa, you need to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what comes. You are connected back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The servant who show or who display or who realizes or who comes to the point in which they see no other one helping them and they can't run to anyone else, so they run to their Lord, they run to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the servant whose difficulty has become something of ease. Why? Because they've able to establish back their connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're able to establish a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're able to gain something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and this is found, and this is known. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُم مِّن شَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, certainly we will come and we will try you. وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُم. We will certainly try you. From bala, we'll send bala to you, difficulty upon you. Something of fear, something of hunger, something of loss of lives, something of a loss of your wealth, of your lives, of thamarat, of the things that you hold precious, or things that you work for, or your children, a loss of your children, or the things that you love, the things that you gain, thamarat, your fruits of your labor. وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ, and give glad tidings to the ones who endure, the ones who are patient and persevere. الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْ مُصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. Those are the ones when a difficulty hits them. Those are the ones when a difficulty unexpectedly hits them. When a difficulty, a trial, a test, unexpectedly hits them. Asaba means that it comes without their knowledge. It comes without them knowing. Or they don't expect it. They don't expect it. So when a difficulty comes unexpectedly and hits them, what happens? They don't become flustered. And they don't look for solutions from anything else or anyone else except Allah. قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. They say, to Allah we belong, and to Allah is our final return. To Allah. They look for the solution with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They look for the solution with Allah. That's the servant who takes difficulty, yusra. They have a difficulty. فَإِنَّمَا الْأُسْرِ يُسْرًا. They've taken the difficulty and they've turned it into something that benefits. What is it that benefits? They see that they are in need and they verify and they become realized in their servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in which they are returned to humility, to lowliness, he says. Dhillatuk, that the best moment in the servant's life is when they see they are needy, when they see they're needy. And their best moment, because of their seeing that they're needy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they also realize something too. And they return to humility. They return to humility. What humility? The humility that they don't have the strength or the power to take themselves out of that difficulty. That's the best moment of the servant. خَيْرَ أَوْقَاتِكَ. He says, what is the best moment of the servant? The best moment of the servant is when he sees himself powerless before Allah Ta'ala. Jalla wa ala. He sees himself completely defenseless, powerless, without might, without plans, before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the best moment of the servant. وَمَكَرُوا وَمَكْرُ اللَّهِ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ. When he sees that the best plans that the servant can make does not even compare to the plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Doesn't even compare. That no matter what he plans, once Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala plans, and Allah always plans because that's the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all our times, that if it matches with that of Allah, then that is the best for the servant. And so the servant lives his life in the realization of his servitude, in that he does everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants him to do. That he does everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants him to do. And that he knows that what will happen is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his best moments are the moments in which he expresses his servitude. And that moment of expression of servitude is the moment in which he fulfills, or he sees that he's needy before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He sees that he's needy before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what should the servant do in order to have these moments and to make sure that these moments are his best? The moments in which he expresses in which he sees that he returns to lowliness, to humility. How does the servant achieve it? How does the servant achieve these moments? The servant he achieves this moment by the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The servant who realizes and thanks Allah for everything that they have. When the servant sees that everything that they have has come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're thankful for it. They're thankful for it. They become humbled with it. They become humble with it. No matter what they have, whether they have the wealth of this world, or whether they have knowledge of their deen, or whether they come to practice their deen, or whether they come to do whatever of this deen, of this religion, whatever they have, that they become thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they know that Allah has favored them. Not because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants them to stand out amongst people, but because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants them to stand out before Him. That's the servant. That his best awqat, that his best waqt, or the best time that he has, is the time in which he sees his need to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he returns to lowliness, he returns to humility. In that he sees that everything that has come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Has come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he thanks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if one wants to express that need, one has to be thankful. And then one has to see that Allah has risen one, given to one, granted one success. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to be a servant. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to be a slave. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted it to you. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to be a servant, a slave. And He wants your realization in it. So it's not because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to stand out amongst people. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to stand out in front of Him. Jalla wa ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to be a servant to Him. And that saves yourself from what? It saves from being arrogant or being prideful. And so the servant will return then to humility, because he sees that he does not, every strength and every power that he thinks that he has or that she has becomes taken away. It's taken away from them. And they stand before their Lord as a servant who's truly in need and who recognizes that need and who becomes realized in that need. But it only happens, and it only happens if you thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because we live in prosperity here. We live in prosperity here. If we lived in adversity, if we lived in poverty, if you lived in poverty, then we would say, look at the difficulty and ask Allah to take you out of those difficulty. But in general, we live in prosperity. And the ones who are prosperous has to enter faqa, they enter neediness through the door of thankfulness. That's how they enter. They'll enter this door of neediness through the thankfulness, so that they remove themselves from whatever they've gotten, or whatever they have achieved, or whatever successes they've gained. They remove themselves from it, and they place Allah in front of it. As long as, when the servant does that, they put Allah in front of everything that they've achieved, and everything that they've gained or gotten, then the servant will enter through that door of faqa, through that door of neediness, or that door of lowliness. Lowliness, being low to Allah. And then they will gain that humility. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us and guide us, forgive us, have mercy upon us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect our parents, our elders, give them good health, long life. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those who have passed away, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them His mercy, His maghfirah and His shade on that day when there's no shade except His. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those who are sick and ailing, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them healing, and grant them, remedy them. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring them back to good health. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provide for them. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect our children, keep them on the straight path. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them success in this world and success in the next world. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect them, safeguard them. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect and safeguard all of our brothers and our sisters facing difficulties. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala safeguard them, feed them and clothe them, protect them, secure them in their homeland. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for them from their difficulties. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them the best of this world and the best of the hereafter. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase us in knowledge and practice of our deen. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make our homes amongst the homes of the believers, and make our last words our very best words. سبحانك وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.
Thank you for listening to The Hikam with Shaykh Zahir Bacchus. Help Seekers Hub spread the light of guidance to millions around the world by supporting us through monthly donations by going to seekershub.org/donate. Your donations are tax deductible in the US and Canada.